You already know that I would do a lot of things to live in Stars Hollow. It's a walkable small town with a gazebo that celebrates fast talking and any seasonal change. Stars Hollow is clearly trying really hard to be a tourist destination. But what is it like for the people who actually own houses there? Like our one and only Lorelai Gilmore, who I think hit the jackpot. She lives in a town close to home with a wraparound porch and a garage big enough to fit a boat and all the complicated feelings about that boat. Today, I'll be talking about Lorelai and Rory's house, the homiest home in early 2000s television. And I'm starting with something kind of controversial. I think this house is a trap. It's beautiful, with wisteria climbing up the porch, the perfect place for a mother and daughter to feel safe and happy. And it didn't come for free. For Lorelai, it symbolizes everything she's worked hard for. So how could something so lovely be a trap? Lorelai's connection with this house means that anything or anyone who might change her relationship with her house becomes a threat to her independence. And independence, in itself, is very important to her. Let me set the scene. I'm on the couch watching Gilmore Girls reruns on ABC Family, Freeform Who. Max Medina's there. I'm liking Max and Lorelai's chemistry. I feel bad for Rory having her mom date her teacher, but they have a lot in common and I think it will all work out. I'm seeing the yellow daisies. Not my favorite flower, but Lorelai seems to enjoy them. But then in season 2, there is the episode where Max stays at Lorelai's house for the first time. Would I do that before I ordered 1,000 yellow daisies? Yeah, probably. Max is fast asleep and Lorelai isn't. She runs to her daughter for comfort. That's how things work around here.
Hey. Mom. I have a boy in my room. So I have a boy in my room.
You like Max?
No, yes, I do, but it's weird. We've never had a man in the house like this up there. Not properly talked about this.
About what?
About having Max in the house, about the effect on you. But you know, once we are married, nothing will ever be the same again.
I know.
It won't just be the me and you secret special clubhouse no boys allowed thing anymore.
It will be different.
Not just different. Our lives as we know them will be over.
Mom, we're not dying.
No, we're not dying. But the life we had is gonna morph into this, mutation that we could never possibly have conceived.
The whole time they're talking, there is a clear fear from Lorelai about changing the setup in this house. She might love him, but she loves her life in this house more. And then the fight that makes Lorelai run. Over what? A printer. I have also had fights over printers, so I can relate to this. But it's not a printing issue, it's printer adjacent. Max needs a key to drop off the printer. To where? Lorelai's house. And the symbolism isn't even lost on our love interest.
So I was gonna drop my printer off at the house, but Rory wasn't there. And guess who doesn't possess his own set of keys yet?
Ah, I'm guessing it's you.
I'm trying really hard not to read too much into this.
Like what?
Like you don't want me having keys or you don't want me coming in the house.
Max, that's crazy.
Do I think Max could have solved all these issues by leaving the printer on the protected porch in this sleepy town? Yes. I would have left the printer right here, and I also wouldn't have said this.
You need to think about someone other than yourself for a few minutes a day.
Because that's how you get unengaged. But her whole reason for calling off the wedding seems really focused on the fact that she wasn't ready to change her home situation. To Lorelai, this house is an encapsulation of herself and all of her accomplishments, but with a roof instead of like a quirky hat. Now let's get into the big debate on every Gilmore Girls forum ever. The economy of Lorelai and Rory's life. And those discussions are fed by articles like this. They say that Lorelai's house is worth $2.8 million, which made alarm bells go off in my head because this article was written in 2015. And that doesn't even compute with Brooklyn prices. So let's pull up money.com's source. Ah yes, a cartoon infographic on the cost of TV moms' homes, made by Trulia, a company owned by Zillow, who can directly benefit from house prices being inflated. I love this source. The usual argument is, okay, it might not be worth $2.8 million, but there's no way Lorelai can afford a house this nice. But I would argue she probably could. On a soundtrack, they had a little image of a postcard which had an address, and in that address was a zip code, a fictional zip code for Stars Hollow. And using my calculations from my Mr. Zip video, that would mean we're in Wallingford, Connecticut. You can also just Google the zip code. This real town is halfway between Hartford and New Haven, just like Stars Hollow. And just this year, the average home value was $349,000. Nearly 30 years after Lorelai would have bought her house in 1995. That's just a little bit under 2.8, I think. In 1990, according to the census, the majority of homes being sold in Wallingford was between $100,000 and $200,000. She would have been a first-time homebuyer, so she might have qualified for state programs. So her down payment could have been anywhere from $5,000 to $40,000. She was well employed at the Dragonfly, she was the general manager and next in command to the owner who had already retired. Average rent costs in Wallingford were between $500 and $600 in 1990, according to that same census. And I would guess that it could be much lower if you were living in a potting shed on your employer's property. And that brings us to the most confusing part about watching Gilmore Girls. Most of us are watching Gilmore Girls in the future. I watched the later seasons live, but most of my watching was DVD sets and Netflix. And most of those were after the show had finished. Gilmore Girls ran from October 2000 to May 2007. Less than 6 months later, the Great Recession had officially started. Do I think the recession could have been avoided if Amy Sherman Palladino was given full control over the final season? No, but I do think it's interesting that most of us are watching the Gilmore Girls post-recession and not realizing how much the economy and tourism was popping off in the 90s. 1991 to 2001, it was the longest recorded economic expansion in the United States, marked by low inflation. A single-family home cost 4 times the median income. It had been that way since the 60s. The rule of thumb that people were taught was to buy a house that was 2.5 times their annual income. So if you made $50,000, you could afford a house that cost $125,000. But right now, it might be hard to find a house that costs that little. That's okay, maybe you need to rent. So you should follow the other old rule of thumb, where your rent should be 30% of your pre-taxed income. So $50,000 divided by 12, just over $4,000, which leaves you with $1,250 for your monthly rent. That should be easy enough to find, right? Something to remember about the way back yesteryear of the 20th century is remote work was pretty rare, and you can only charge so much for a house in a town with no jobs. When you think about Stars Hollow, it is not a hub of industry. There doesn't seem to be a factory or a bunch of office jobs. The biggest commodity in town is tourism. Thank you, Taylor. Making Lorelai's job, running the inn, one of the best options locally available. I'm gonna get into the rest of Lorelai's finances in a bit, but first, let's deep dive on this home. You've seen the outside once or twice, or possibly 10 times per episode, because even though the Gilmore Girls is a drama, it's also a sitcom. Where am I? Where did you bring me? You've literally seen this place 1,000 times. Whose couch is this? Ugh, just shower. Oh, it's Lorelai's house. Where did you bring me? Oh, Friday night dinner. I hope Emily's not too mean to her employees today. The decor style of Lorelai's house wasn't even something I was noticing the first time I watched this show. And that's because a lot of people's houses looked like a slightly less manicured version of this. Cozy, maximalist, older stuff mixed with newer stuff. Not a super clear theme, but comfortable and warm. In the coming 2000s, clean whites and blues became much more popular, but when I'm thinking of interiors in Gilmore Girls, I'm thinking of warm yellows, mossy greens, beige, deeper tones. I think this house is somewhat based on its time period, but definitely also on its location. This house screams eclectic New England home, while also screaming middle-class artsy tourist town with really good thrift stores. And that brings us to an eternal conflict of this show. What this house looks like on the outside versus what it looks like on the inside. From the inside, it feels cozy and quirky, but then from the outside, you'll notice this place looks really big. It doesn't make much sense that there's only 1 bedroom upstairs when you could definitely fit at least 3. It's long and wide, but doesn't go back at all. To me, it looks a lot like a Victorian farmhouse, especially with the wraparound porch. A book published in 1878 called House Plans for Everybody. I think their farmhouse is a pretty good comparison to this one. This book also has a really good description of what makes a farmhouse different from a regular house. Unlike the villager, the farmer has ample road front, and his house should be so arranged as to secure the most pleasant outlook from the living rooms. What the writer is referring to is lot sizes. In more densely populated areas, you're seeing really narrow lots that go back a long way. It's true in cities like Chicago, where huge areas were built completely on a grid. So almost all lots are 25 feet by 125 feet. But it's also true in suburban towns like Wallingford, Connecticut. And a narrow lot usually gets you a narrow house, like most of the houses in this book. And although a farmhouse is a really good cover for why the house is designed like this, The real reason is this is a filming location. Lorelai's house doesn't go back at all because Suki's house is right on the other side with its own front rooms and facade. And lots of things in Gilmore Girls don't make sense. Why is there a bathroom on the first floor that magically turns into a closet later? Because the Gilmore Girls don't have IBS. They have EBB. Ex-boyfriend boxes. Or why does Rory live downstairs when it would be much more realistic for her to have a bedroom upstairs? I actually think there's a hidden metaphor here. Based on the house layout, it makes sense that before Rory's room was Rory's room, it was a dining room. But Lorelai barely has use for a kitchen. She definitely doesn't need a dining room. A kitchen table fits her needs, but also for storytelling, it builds even more contrast between Lorelai and her mother, Emily. Emily is forcing unwilling parties into a dining room every single Friday night and presumably most days of Lorelai's early life. I think by converting a dining room into a bedroom, Lorelai is able to close the door on that part of her life. Until Chilton, of course. There's more to compare between Lorelai and Emily and their houses, but you can already sense most of it. Lorelai has mismatched furniture. Emily's is always part of a set. For Emily, it's dark woods, ornate upholstered furniture, golden frames. For Lorelai, it's silly doodads and comfy couches and a monkey lamp. What I think is funny is Lorelai would say her style is completely different from her mother's. But when you look at where she works and even some of the pieces in her own home, she is still definitely in tune with her mother's style. Now let's get to the biggest day-to-day commonality between Lorelai and Emily. They both do not cook. A lot of people's biggest argument to Lorelai being irresponsible with money comes down to food. And I think that's looking at eating through our very modern situation, which makes eating food that you didn't cook yourself a luxury. And yes, when you're Richard and Emily and eating meals made by your maid and cook, it certainly is a luxury. But eating a meal you didn't make yourself hasn't always been luxurious. You'll notice that the place that Lorelai and Rory are always eating at is a diner, not a restaurant. For a long time, diners were cheap places to eat, especially for single people. Rory chose to notice that this is written in Jess's familiar bubble lettering, but I'm noticing it's an omelet meal for $4.75. They always ordered takeout from restaurants and picked it up so they didn't have to tip. They seem to be living off a constant flow of leftovers, which are presumably a mix of takeout from the inn, the Chinese restaurant, the pizza place, and Luke's diner. If you want to learn more about cheap diner food in the US, I have a video that is very close to being finished. And if you all encouraged me that you wanted to see it, I'd probably speed up my process. Now let's get into Landlord Luke. It's clear that Luke owns his own building. I actually think that's probably one of the reasons his food's so affordable. When you're not paying exorbitant prices to a property manager, you can really make things happen. But the funniest thing to me is how he's casually picking up properties in Stars Hollow. Like he's the Monopoly man who traded his top hat for a snapback. He owns his building, the building next door. He's an investor in the Dragonfly. He kinda bought and then kinda unbought the Twickham house. But my favorite thing about Luke isn't that he's a Stars Hollow mogul, but that he understands that people have complicated relationships with places. It's not that surprising from the man who wears the same baseball cap every day and turned his dad's hardware store into a diner. And he shows that thoughtfulness in season 5 when Luke and Lorelai are engaged and they're trying to figure out where they want to live. Lorelai seems willing to make the jump for him and move into the Twickham house. But he doesn't end up asking her to make that jump, because in further conversations, he sees her hesitation.
I was thinking we could even pull the crew over here, do some quick touch-ups before selling.
Wait, touch-ups? Where? Here?
Yeah, it hasn't been painted in a while. Fixing it up will help it sell.
Right. You know, I've been thinking.
What?
Maybe we should hang on to this house.
If you want, we can just hang on to it and rent it out.
I don't want anyone else living in it.
In season 2, Max poked at Lorelai's uncertainty. She left him and kept the house just as it was. With Luke, Lorelai seems willing to make bigger changes, but he doesn't need her to. He doesn't need her to prove how much she would adjust her life for him. He wants her in a place that makes her happy and where he can see himself being happy. And he knows that they can do that in a house that she already loves.
It's about enlarging the bedroom to live here.
Here? You want to live here?
Sure. I don't have a lot of stuff. We just need a little more closet space, a bigger bathroom, bigger bedroom.
Well, what about the Twickham house?
Too damn big. We can get along fine here for a while, maybe forever. It's a great house. You love this house.
I do love this house.
I also love this house. When I see people asking, kind of begrudgingly, how Lorelai can afford to clothe, feed, and house her and her child, it's got me asking more questions about the economy than about Lorelai's finances. The house is big, but it's also a soundstage. But when you look at the facts of it, A single mom with a full-time job, living with her daughter in a 2-bedroom, 1-bath house, and eating most of their meals at a diner, that doesn't feel irresponsible to me. That seems like something people could afford in the past, and I hope that they can afford in the future. Now, if you're still watching, there is a 75% chance that you've watched Twilight. I made a video last month about Edward Cullen's house, and it's one of my favorite that I've ever made. So give it a watch if that sounds even remotely interesting to you. And if you haven't yet subscribed to this channel, when you subscribe, I'm kind of inviting you to my internet house. And there's a lot of rooms in my internet house, and each of them is dedicated to a different topic. So, you know, we can talk about Gilmore Girls, but we can also talk about weird old houses. We can talk about infrastructure. Sometimes I talk about stamps and mail. Sometimes I talk about witches. That's more in the attic area. But I think you should join me and we can have fun. I'm Kendra Gaylord. Thanks so much for watching. Bye.